She was very pretty, with blue eyes and black hair. Her skin was delicate and fair, and so she was called Snow White. Everyone was quite sure she would become very beautiful. Though her stepmother was a wicked woman, she too was very beautiful, and the magic mirror told her this every day, whenever she asked it.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the loveliest lady in the land?
The reply was always,
You are, your majesty.
until the dreadful day when she heard it say,
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the loveliest lady in the land?
Snow White is the loveliest lady in the land.
The stepmother was furious and, wild with jealousy, began plotting to get rid of her rival. Calling one of her trusty servants, she bribed him with a rich reward to take Snow White into the forest far away from the castle. Then, unseen, he was to put her to death. The greedy servant, attracted to the reward, agreed to do this deed, and he led the innocent little girl away. However, when they came to the fatal spot, the man's courage failed him, and, leaving Snow White sitting beside a tree, he mumbled an excuse and ran off. Snow White was all alone in the forest. Night came, but the servant did not return. Snow White, alone in the dark forest, began to cry bitterly. She thought she could feel terrible eyes spying on her. She heard strange sounds and rustlings that made her heart thump. At last, overcome by tiredness, she fell asleep, curled up under a tree. Snow White slept fitfully, wakening from time to time with a start and staring into the darkness round her. Several times she thought she felt something or somebody touch her as she slept. At last, dawn woke the forest to the song of the birds, and Snow White too awoke. A whole world was stirring to life, and the little girl was glad to see how silly her fears had been. However, the thick trees were like a wall round her, and as she tried to find out where she was, she came upon a path. She walked along it, hopefully. On she walked till she came to a clearing. There stood a strange cottage with a tiny door and tiny windows. Everything about the cottage was much tinier than it ought to be. Snow White pushed the door open.
Tiny plates and spoons. There must be 7 of them. The table's laid out for 7 people.
Upstairs was a bedroom with 7 neat little beds. Going back to the kitchen, Snow White had an idea.
I'll make them something big. They'll be glad to find out.
Towards dusk, 7 tiny men marched homewards singing. But when they opened the door, to their surprise, they found a bowl of hot, steaming soup on the table and the whole house spick and span, and Snow White fast asleep on the bed. The chief dwarf prodded her gently.
Who are you? Yes. Who are you?
Snow White told them her sad story, and tears sprang to the dwarf's eyes. Then one of them said, in between sneezes,
Achoo! Stay here with us. Achoo!
"Hooray, hooray," they cheered, dancing joyfully round the little girl. The dwarf said to Snow White,
Oh, we could live here. Return to the house where we don't belong. Must be a very good woman. You'll be safe with us and we don't even take too much.
Snow White gratefully accepted their hospitality, and the next morning the dwarf set off for work. But they warned Snow White.
But remember, Snow White, do not open the door to strangers. Don't open the door to strangers.
Meanwhile, the servant had returned to the castle with the heart of a roe deer. He gave it to the cruel stepmother, telling her it belonged to Snow White, so that he could claim the reward. Highly pleased, the stepmother turned again to the magic mirror. But her hopes were dashed, for the mirror replied,
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the loveliest lady in the land?
But her hopes were dashed, for the mirror replied,
Snow White is still the loveliest lady in the land, who lives with the 7 dwarfs down in the forest.
The stepmother was beside herself with rage.
She must die! She must die!
Disguising herself as an old peasant woman, she put a poisoned apple with the others in her basket. Then, taking the quickest way into the forest, she crossed the swamp at the edge of the trees. She reached the bank unseen, just as Snow White stood waving goodbye to the 7 dwarfs on their way to the mine.
Who's there?
She's an old peasant woman selling apples.
I don't want any apples, thank you.
They are so beautiful and juicy.
Said the velvety voice from outside the door.
I'm not supposed to open the door to strangers.
Said the little girl, who was reluctant to disobey her friends.
And rightly so, good girl. But as a reward for not opening the door, I'll give you an apple.
Without a further thought, Snow White opened the door just a tiny crack to take the apple.
See, aren't they lovely?
Snow White bit into the fruit, and as she did, fell to the ground. The effect of the terrible poison left her lifeless instantaneously. Now chuckling evilly, the wicked stepmother hurried off, but as she ran back across the swamp, she tripped and fell into quicksand. No one heard her cries for help, and she disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, the dwarves came out of the mine to find the sky had grown dark and stormy. Loud thunder echoed through the valleys, and streaks of lightning ripped the sky. Worried about Snow White, they ran as quickly as they could down the mountain to the cottage. There they found Snow White, lying still and lifeless, the poisoned apple by her side. They did their best to bring her round, but it was no use. They wept and wept for a long time. Then they laid her on a bed of rose petals. Each day they took turns to sit with her and watch over her. Then, one evening, they discovered a strange young man admiring Snow White's lovely face through the glass. After listening to the story, the prince, for he was a prince, made a suggestion.
If you allow me to take her to the castle, I will call in all of the best doctors to awaken her from this peculiar sleep.
The prince knelt down and kissed the sleeping Snow White. As though by magic, the prince's kiss broke the spell. To everyone's astonishment, Snow White opened her eyes. She had amazingly come back to life. From that day on, Snow White lived happily in a great castle, but from time to time she was drawn back to visit the little cottage down in the forest.